Welcome everybody to today's webinar, Living with Loss, Navigating Grief and Chronic Illness. I'm gonna turn it over to my friend at the Huntington's Disease Society of America, Marianne.
Hello, everybody. My name is Marianne Emmerich. I am Senior Manager of Community Services at the Huntington's Disease Society of America, and I'm really excited in assisting today's webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Cara Loy, who is an incredible social worker at the University of Alabama's Movement Disorders Clinic. I'm going to pass it over to you, Cara.
Hey, everybody. I'm so glad to be with you all today. Having some trouble with the slides here. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for being here. I'm just honored to have been asked to do this at all. So I'm glad to be here with you guys. So I know that this is a loaded topic. There's so much that can be covered with this, but I only have 30 minutes with you guys, and then we have a lovely panel. So I'm just going to try to stick to the basics. And of course, as we go throughout this presentation, if you notice that maybe there's some stuff that comes up for you, some unacknowledged things that maybe you need to process through a little bit more, then I definitely encourage you to be sure to process the specifics of your grief with a licensed therapist. You may even join a grief support group, and your local social worker will probably be able to help you, point you to a grief support group or counselor in your area. So the goal of this presentation is not to cure your pain or take away your grief, as much as I fully wish that I could do that for you. I want you to walk away from this feeling seen. I want you to walk away from this feeling hope and encouragement. And hopefully something will be said today that touches you in your particular journey, and you can leave after this hour with something to carry you forward. We all know that grief is sticky and muddy and hard, and there is hope though. And I want you to be able to hold on to something from today to help you trudge through that mud. So let's talk about it. It's important in grief to first acknowledge that it's even there. And so you guys have done the first step in acknowledging that maybe this webinar is for you and being here today. So grief is defined as deep and poignant distress caused by, or as if by, bereavement. You know, often grief is a reaction to a singular event, often the death of a loved one. And most of the time we're able to grieve that loss, experience some closure or acceptance, and then while we may still feel the pain of that loss, over time, we may not feel it as acutely as we once did, even though it's always there. And many, if not all of you, have experienced the loss of a loved one, maybe a loved one that had Huntington's or ataxia. And regardless of the type of grief, though, it is always a complex process towards healing, and it is highly individualized to each person. And despite what some people may want you to believe, there is no specific timeline in getting through it. However, with the chronic illnesses, the losses are unending. And so the grief can be an even more complex and drawn out process. Some professionals call this infinite losses. So if we go back to the definition, deep and poignant distress caused by or as if by bereavement. In the case of chronic illness, it's as if you're experiencing many small deaths of the person that you once were, or the person your loved one once was. You have daily reminders of what you are losing or have lost already. And so finding some resolution or acceptance can be really difficult because you may be trying to reach that and then grappling with this new reality in your life, and then another loss to your health happens and you have to go through the process all over again. So it's kind of like a loss without closure. I found an article online written from the perspective of a woman living with chronic illness. She doesn't have HD or ataxia, but she is still living with a chronic illness, and her name is Megan Marjorie. She discussed her lived experience in this way. It's the continuous grief of the could have been, should have been, and the maybes. And sometimes the thing that hurts the worst is the maybes. The grief comes in waves, like watching your calendar fill with medical appointments and procedures, your home filling with medications and medical equipment that you used to only see in sad movies. It's the embarrassment using mobility aids in public, the cruel glances as you use the handicapped parking spot, and the constant fear that you're just slowing everyone down. It's being excited when your friends achieve their goals, graduating college, getting their dream job, traveling abroad, starting a family, etc. Yet at the same time, wanting to scream, cry, and throw a fit because of how badly I want to be able to do those exact same things, and wondering, how did I become this person? Why does my life have to be like this? It's losing the little things about you that weren't so little after all. It's losing trust in your body, the one thing that's supposed to carry you in this life. Illness becomes the puppet master, and you are left dangling by strings completely at its mercy. And to me, one of the biggest parts of grief and chronic illness is that fear of losing that control, being unable to plan, feeling as though you're unable to dream. Because in the end, when it comes to nearly every aspect of your life, your choices revolve around your illness, and you never truly know what it's going to throw at you next. Maybe that sounded familiar to you. Maybe it resonated with some of y'all. I know to me, that echoed perfectly what I hear talking with my patients and my families almost every day. So we're going to quickly go through the grieving process model that some of you, probably all of you, are familiar with. But it's just to familiarize ourselves with it, because often people don't often realize that they are grieving when they experience emotions like anger or depression. But we'll go deeper to that in a second. I want you guys to think about, have you ever lost a valuable item and never found it again? What emotions did you experience after you realized you lost it? Maybe it was like a wedding ring or your car keys or something like that. Likely you went through some of these emotions as you were trying to find it or grieved the loss of it. I'll tell you a personal story. So my dad gave me a ring when I was young, and now this is a story where I did find it, so it's not the best example, but it's something. So my dad gave me a ring when I was young. It was very sentimental to me. The meaning of it was sentimental to me as well, and I wore it for years and years. Well, fast forward to grad school, I'm sitting in social work class, and I look down and it's not on my finger anymore. And obviously my first feeling was panic and then a bit of shock. And I actually disrupted the class and said, hey, can y'all like just look around you and tell me if you see anything? They stopped class and everybody went searching for it, which was so kind. And I looked in the same places over and over again. And I went to my apartment and I ransacked it trying to find it. I was just in full denial, like, there's no way that this ring I've had on my finger just suddenly slipped off and is gone. And how am I going to tell my dad? And I didn't, I don't remember experiencing much anger, but I did have a little bit of bargaining where I was like, I'm not going to tell my dad yet. I'm going to just pray about it. It's going to show up at some point. And I definitely was a little sad because, again, this was a sentimental thing to me, probably the most sentimental thing I owned. So I definitely felt like part of my identity was a little bit gone, something that important to me was gone. And I eventually found it in my sock drawer like 2 weeks later. And it was summer, so I was wearing sandals, didn't really need my socks much except to go to the gym. So I just told myself, Cara, if you went to the gym more regularly, you would have found this earlier. But anyway, so not, this is a slightly impersonal example, but that is an example of like, you still go through the process, even losing something, something of significance, but especially when losing someone of significance or losing your health, which is also very core to who you are. So maybe for you guys, maybe you felt some denial or shock at the time of your diagnosis or when you got your test results. Or maybe the doctor told you you shouldn't be working anymore or you shouldn't be driving anymore. Like I said, there's infinite losses with this. So you have to go through this over and over again. And this can lead to feelings of numbness and can lead a person to not acknowledging what is going on. I know that we've had some patients that are in the full denial stage and won't even come to see us or won't talk to their family about it openly. But I will say denial doesn't take the loss away. It just leaves it unacknowledged. You may have experienced anger with this. So anger can lead to feelings of, why me? And then we often lash out at others in this stage as a way to cope. And we'll talk about later, what are some healthier ways that we can go about feeling this emotion that's still important to feel. You may have experienced bargaining. This often looks like someone beseeching a higher power to take it away if they strike a deal with them. And then depression. This is where we really understand most of the grief work to be. We see someone who's depressed and we know that is grief. But if you see someone angry, there is always an underlying reason why someone is angry. And often it is grief, and that is part of the process. So that's just a reminder there. But grief is really, the whole process is grief, but depression often hits because before acceptance, because we're really starting to feel the weight of the loss, and maybe you're actually allowing yourself to feel some of these emotions, which can be overwhelming and lead to depression. But then we can get to acceptance, and it's accepting a new reality and beginning to move forward. So main thing with these, though, is we don't want you to get stuck in any of these emotions like anger or depression, because it can actually prevent healing if you stay in those, and it can lead you to being detached from life, which means you're also detached from your healing. So I want you to be able to identify what you're feeling, and there is big merit in being able to increase your emotional vocabulary, like I'm not angry, I'm frustrated, like being able to like expand that, but this at least helps to as a starting point. But walking around with unacknowledged grief can lead to worse health outcomes, issues in your relationship, more depression and anxiety. So it's important to be able to acknowledge this. Now, this is the textbook version of the grieving process, right? We've seen this before, each stage in order, but I think we all know that's not really how it works. This is the reality of grief. It's a mess. Grief is not linear. You can feel a lot of these things simultaneously. So you can feel sadness or fear while also clinging to hope. You can start to move forward with your life, and then the next day spiral down into a depression. So if you've experienced that, know that you're not alone in that, and know that that is perfectly normal. So grief is messy, and we see that with this picture especially. So let's start talking about healing. I'm going to go through a few different models with you guys because I'm a social worker and we like a theoretical framework, and that's just what we do. But hopefully it'll help you a little bit. This is the dual process model. Sorry, I just skipped over something real quick. Hold on. Okay, so this is the dual process model, and this is essentially saying what I've just been saying. You may start to make a plan to move forward while also grieving what once was, and both are essential to healing and growth. So we have our loss-oriented stressors. A lot of this is wishing to go back to your pre-loss state, maybe before you knew your results, before you knew that your health was going to be impacted, when you thought you were always going to be in really good health. There is that processing the experience of it, a changed bodily function or a physical appearance. So we'll discuss processing through loss-oriented next. Restoration-oriented, that's starting to put together a new life after loss. So illness, as you guys know, derails a lot of stuff in your life, including your career, maybe even your relationships, your daily life and activities, your hobbies. So this is where you start building a new life around this new reality. But it's called a restoration-oriented stressor for a reason, because it is stressful to think about and have to rethink about your future. So now I have this. What does this mean for my job? Do I need to change it? Am I always going to be able to do this, or do I need to do something else? How's this going to impact my relationships in the future? Am I still going to be able to do a lot of the hobbies that I used to be able to do, or that I can do now? Am I still going to be able to do that? Or do I need to start exploring some different options? So it's stressful to think through those things, but there's a restorative nature to thinking through those things. I've met a lot of people who hear their diagnosis and they say, well, it is what it is, and just immediately move on. And while this can appear at that time like a very strong mental mindset, and maybe it is, there's some people that have worked through and they have peace with whatever results they get, especially with my people with Huntington's. But often that can still mean that there's work being left undone if they just go ahead and move on, because it's not allowing time to process and grieve. And at some point, it's just going to become unhealthy. But I've also seen the opposite, where a patient receives their diagnosis and their whole world completely unravels and they're stuck in the grieving process without moving forward. So the model of this is that both focusing on the loss and focusing on the future are essential to work on as you grieve. If you only focus on the fact that you or your loved one have this diagnosis, then again, you're going to remain stuck there and have a hard time building a future. But on the other hand, if you don't spend time on that, you won't work through what is necessary to then be able to think about, well, what is possible for my life. So I guess what I'm saying is don't get stuck in the loss, but don't skip over it either. It's important to find a way to integrate this diagnosis with your present identity, but it doesn't have to be your entire identity. So this is what I would call good grief. The people who, or actually the article that I read about the dual process model says that grief involves a moving back and forth between coping with loss-oriented and restoration-oriented stressors. This is dynamic and complex and can involve moment-by-moment oscillations between the two stressors, kind of like this picture here. At one moment, a grieving person could look at her changed body in the mirror, tearing up over an appearance-related change. And the next moment, she could brainstorm ways to manage this change, finding clothes that will flatter her new body, for example. Oscillation also occurs between active grieving and taking a break from grief. So the people that coined this say that grief work is arduous and exhausting, because it really is, and respite at times is recuperative. So it is perfectly okay to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to lay down my grief today because I don't want to deal with that right now. I have something else going on and I want to be able to enjoy it. I'm going to lay this down for now and then pick it back up again later. So again, you're not laying it down to never pick it back up again. But maybe you say, you know what, I just want to enjoy my nephew's birthday party or my daughter's wedding, whatever it may be. So it's perfectly okay to say, I'm laying this down. I'll pick it back up when I can. And that actually can be really recuperative and helpful for your healing process to be able to have those joys in your life and let yourself feel some joy. So the 4 healing emotions. I forget who coined this. I think his name was John Gray. He's like PhD something. But he said that feeling these 4 emotions is important in the process of healing. So now we're kind of focusing on that loss-oriented stressors. How do we grieve these losses? So these are important emotions to feel. Anger can be a pretty good emotion to feel. There's just unhealthy ways of going about it and healthy ways of going about it. So we'll talk about that in a second. But anger allows us to emotionally explore what has happened that we did not want to happen. So ask yourself, what has happened that I didn't want to happen? And not expressing that anger can risk you remaining again in that numb and lifeless state. So his idea is to feel these things and then release them. And I want to be clear that that is not as simple as saying, just release it or let it go. Like it's not saying that. It is saying that in that moment, acknowledge why you feel that way, acknowledge that it's there, explore why you feel that way, and then release it in that moment and don't dwell on it and move on in that moment. But this is something that you're going to have to do over and over and over again. It doesn't mean I'm going to lash out and feel this anger and then I get to move on. That's not really how it works. So sadness, gotta move my thing here. Sadness allows us to emotionally explore what did not happen that you wanted to happen. So what did not happen that you wanted to happen? And it's important to feel that so that you can eventually adjust your expectations of what is now possible. So feel that, then release it in that moment. Fear. Fear is an important emotion. There's a lot of very real anxieties in getting a diagnosis like these. So it allows us to emotionally explore what could happen that you don't want to happen. So what could happen that you don't want to happen? I know I hear these anxieties often of, I saw my parent with this and I don't want it to be the same for me. Or I've read all these articles and I've heard the worst of the worst. I don't want it to be the same for me. It's good to express that. But again, we don't want to dwell in that, but be sure to express that with a safe person. And then sorrow. Sorrow allows us to explore what cannot happen that you want to happen. So maybe your future is not going to be what you expected it to be. There are some things that maybe you can't do anymore that you had expected to do. So it's an acknowledgement of the powerlessness to undo what has happened. So it's an acknowledgement of there's stuff that's outside of my control. So again, feeling, then releasing. So this is the way of healing, according to John Gray at least. This helps you reach a healthy perspective and mental peace. You've got to feel these things and explore them. So like I said, there's some healthy ways to do this. I would love to hear from you guys in the chat, and I'm going to open up the chat here. I would love to hear from you guys about ways that you guys have learned to express these emotions, like especially anger and fear, in a healthy way, or maybe help somebody else express theirs in a healthy way. So tell me in the chat, and I have a few suggestions too, but y'all probably blow me away with your suggestion. Talk, yes, absolutely. Counseling, prayer, group sessions. Love it, love it. Creativity, yes, it's a big one. What ways are you guys creative? Support groups, meditation, positive affirmations. Oh, on days that I don't have a lot of tasks to do, I sometimes lie down and allow myself to miss my former abilities. I usually cry for a while, then I get back up and do the things I can still do. Oh, I love that. Letting it out. Yep, just like that. Stuffed animals, poetry. Y'all going so fast, it's hard to see them all. Yoga, exercise, advocacy, love it. I love it. I love it. So some other things in terms of expressing anger. Sometimes we really need, y'all read and learn from each other in the chat, but I'm going to keep going because my time's limited. But sometimes in expressing anger, we really just need to let out like a physical release. But obviously, we don't want to let it out on someone or on anything breakable or whatever. So in working in foster care for our kids who obviously had experienced a lot of grief and loss themselves and had a lot of anger, we would suggest like letting them just rip up a bunch of paper or literally having a punching bag. So they didn't use someone as a punching bag, but having a punching bag so they can get out some of that pent up energy. I had a supervisor who all of us as her supervisees were going through various losses, and she was aware of that. So she took us out to like the backyard in our building that we worked at. And she brought like several containers of eggs and some Kleenex if we needed to cry. And she said, I just want you, this is when eggs weren't super expensive. And she was like, I just want you to throw these eggs at a tree and scream and yell and do whatever you need to do. So it was really cathartic to be able to do that. But maybe it's something, you know, if you don't want to spend throw away money on eggs, then maybe like a water balloon or something where you can throw it and see it shatter, that might be helpful. And some people will like go into a really private place and they'll do like this guttural yell that just like comes from their core and releases a lot of these emotions that they're feeling. Sometimes we just need to yell. But yes, in terms of the quieter things that you can do, maybe journaling, writing it out, maybe writing some poetry like was said in the comments, or playing music, creating art. I'm a pianist, so for me, when I'm feeling a lot of things, I'll go to the piano, no music, and just tinker and come up with something. And just that creativity and that emotional outlet really can help. Maybe it's meditation, mindfulness, definitely exercise, getting out in nature. Maybe you need to step away and do some deep breathing. And then, of course, like it's been said, the core work is going to be done by talking it out with your family or friends or a therapist. So I love all of y'all's great strategies here. So just some other coping strategies, some practical steps that can help you feel more empowered throughout your disease course. A good place to start is by writing down all your questions and then taking them to the doctor. Ask your doctor what specific steps you can take to optimize your health. So knowledge is power. Manage what you can control. That's a big thing. If you go to therapy, you're going to hear that one a lot. You can't control this disease, that you have it, but can you control aspects of it or things that will help you feel better even while having it? So you can control a healthy diet, taking your medication, exercising, and then how you choose to spend your time. Try letting go of unnecessary obligations. That can minimize some stress in your life, but also there is a coping strategy that some people have where they're just stay busy, 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 busy. It is really good to remove some of that so that you have the space to grieve. And I know that that's hard and something that we really fight against, but that it is important to have some space to just be still. So let go of some of these unnecessary things that you've got going on, or maybe you need to step back on some volunteer opportunities or ask your friends and family to help you with things. Please ask for help. That's so important. So prioritize communication in close relationships. This can be stressful for an entire family, and it's not unusual for couples to experience strain in their relationships. So be sure to try to see things from the other person's perspective, keep the lines of communication open. If you have children, plan some alone time with your spouse and some alone time with each child as well. Encourage your partner also to make time for themselves, especially if they're your main caregiver as well. Build a strong support network. More than ever, it's important to surround yourself with positive people who are going to support you in your journey. And then I would also say a support group is also helpful. Shameless plug again. But this is your way to be able to build a network of people who can hear what you have to say and say, you know what, me too. And that can just be so empowering. Plan small things to enjoy every day. Be intentional about how you set your day. If there's like something little like calling a friend or going to the park or something like that, something that brings you joy, fit that into your day. That can really do a lot. And then, of course, as I've said before, seek counseling to help you kind of build more positive coping mechanisms, as we've stated, or maybe even to keep working on your communication style, because we want to keep prioritizing our relationships. We need that support. So maybe you need to work on communication and being open to help. So be sure to reach out about that if you need to. If you need any further resources or support, the NAF does have online support groups, and then the HDSA does as well, that you can find online. Then there's usually local grief support groups. Like if you were sometimes if you're just driving by a church, you can see a sign that says grief support group on Thursdays. So just plug that away in your brain, like maybe go try that out. Or the hospitals sometimes have grief support groups. There's also one that's kind of nationally recognized. It's called Grief Share, and it's also typically held at churches, and it's a long curriculum that you walk through with people. You get a booklet. And it's not necessarily having to deal with chronic illness. It's usually about the death of a loved one. But if that's something that you feel like you need, that's great. So you can look up online and see if there's any local ones or virtual ones near you. And then, of course, if you're having thoughts of ending your life, please call the National Suicide Hotline at 988. So just a couple more things, and then I will wrap up. So one more model. This is Dr. Lois Tonkin, her model of growing around grief. She was a grief counselor, and she believes that everyone should have the opportunity, as I believe as well, to feel better, to find joy and meaning after a bereavement. So this might be through having new experiences, making new friends, or really growing the friendships you currently have, learning new skills or honing skills you already have, finding contentment or making peace with the way things are. This view of grief does not tell someone that their grief will go away in time. You're never just going to get over it, as some people might want you to do. It acknowledges that there will be some days where you feel the grief just as strongly as maybe the day you got your diagnosis in the first place, or the day another loss happened. But there will also be days where you're able to move on with parts of your life. And sometimes people feel guilty about moving on at all because they feel like it's disloyal to the gravity of the diagnosis. But just like I said before, everyone should have the opportunity to feel better and to find joy and meaning in their life. So this growing around grief model just shows how we can still grieve the loss of the life we thought we would have while carrying on growing a new life, which includes the loss. We just grow around it. So finally, y'all may have seen this imagery before in presentations, but I loved it, so I stole it, and here we are. But this is the Japanese art of kintsugi. And if you'll notice, this bowl has been shattered, but it's been put back together with what looks like gold. So instead of, a lot of times when we piece things back together, if we do it all, it's usually through like just an adhesive glue that you can't really see, and you can kind of still see the fractures and everything. But this makes it even more beautiful because they use this lacquer that has gold in it. So this method celebrates each artifact's unique history by emphasizing its fractures and breaks instead of hiding or disguising them. In fact, kintsugi often makes the repaired piece even more beautiful than the original, revitalizing it with a new look and giving it a second life. The practice is related to the Japanese philosophy of wabi-sabi, which calls for seeing beauty in the flawed or imperfect. And you probably know where I'm going with this. So my question to you is, what is the gold that you will use to rebuild? Is it faith? Is it vulnerability? Is it service to others? Community, your family, your friends, therapy, a new career, hobbies? It could be all of the above. Your journey may have started with brokenness, and you may shatter time and time again with those infinite losses. But not one single person on this call or in the world is devoid of metaphorical gold in their life. So it's just a matter of you determining what is the gold in my life. And the rebuilding can often lead to something even more beautiful than your previous state. It's beautifully imperfect. And I don't know about you guys, but whenever I've gone through losses in my life, those have been some of the most formative times in my life that have helped shape my character and my identity. So rebuild with the gold of grace and hope and support and love, and look at the beautiful that you created despite your loss. So I'm gonna end with this. This is the continuation of the article that I found from the perspective of someone living with a chronic illness, and I think she just sums it up beautifully. So I'll end it with this. She says, the thing about chronic illness and grief is that grief is constantly changing and constantly evolving. But at the same time, so are you. Through the months that turn into years, you grow. You change and learn to live side by side with a pain most would claim to be unbearable. A grief of constant losses and what could have beens that would and could be seen as all-consuming. But you realize only great love can cause a great loss. And this pain has taught you there is so much still left in life that is worthy to love and to live for. So you daily face the storm you thought would end you. Some days the waves are almost silent. Some days, because of the pain you have experienced, you see the most extraordinary miracles that few have had the privilege to notice. But other days the waves of grief pull you under, leaving you gasping for air even though it hurts too much to breathe. But you keep going, because it's the storm itself that taught you that great joy and great pain can be experienced all at once. So thank you guys for your stories, for your resilience, and for your time and attention. So I'm going to turn it over to Marianne so y'all can hear from our beautiful panel. Oh, and these are my resources.
Thank you so much, Cara. And anybody that has any questions for Cara, please put it in the Q&A box, and we're going to answer questions at the end. As Cara mentioned, grief is always with you. And Dr., I want to say, Konkin, that model I love, because it is truly with you. You just continue to grow around it, right?
Right.
It doesn't get necessarily smaller. It just, you get stronger, right? And carrying it. And it comes in waves, and sometimes those waves are really big and sometimes they're small, and sometimes we don't know how to handle those waves, but remembering it looks different for everybody. And I'm really excited and grateful that we have two incredible human beings with us today that are going to be able to share their stories. I am honored to introduce to you Melissa and Cheryl, who will share their journey with ataxia, Huntington's disease, and grief. We're going to start this conversation off with Melissa.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to thank the National Ataxia Foundation for asking me to participate in this webinar today. And Cara, that was a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. I'm going to talk just a little bit, it won't take long, about my journey with grief and ataxia to relate to so many of you that are watching today. I worked as a nurse for 20 years. I live in central Illinois, and my journey started in 2016 when I noticed I was falling often. and having terrible muscle cramps. And I kept going to the doctor, and they would tell me to drink more, and they'd tell me to hold on to things and try physical therapy. And I did all those things. I did what they were telling me, but I was starting to feel like I was a hypochondriac. And I went to visit my dad. And my dad had been in a wheelchair for years. My grandpa had, my great gram had. I never thought anything of it. And when I went to visit my dad, he said, I want you to do what's called a heel shin test. And it's a test that neurologists do to you where you put your heel on your shin and run your heel down your leg. I could not do it. And I said, why can't I do that? I mean, I was in shock. Here I was a nurse and I couldn't do that. My dad said, I hate to tell you, kiddo, but I think you have the same thing I do. And I'll just tell you that started my grief. I cried all the way home. I did not cry in front of my dad. And because my dad, what I loved about my dad was that I could sit at a table and we'd tell stories and we'd banter over Cardinal and Cub games. And that's what I loved, sitting and enjoying time with my dad. And my grandpa, what I enjoyed was sitting at a table playing games with him. I love playing games with my gramps. So, but when I got in my car, I flooded. I just lost it because I was grieving for what I was losing, for what was to come. And I knew, even though none of the physicians could tell me what was wrong, I knew my dad knew, or he would have never told me that. So I set out on a mission. I said, Dad, I'm going to find out what it is. And, I was a nurse, and he said, well, good luck. The doctors will give you the runaround. And I said, well, I'm determined to find out what it is. Long story short, my dad got sick in 2017 or late 2016 with pancreatic cancer. So then my grief shifted. I was no longer worried about myself. I was worried about my dad and my loss of my dad and what that meant. And my dad passed away in 2017, early in 2017. Well, after my dad passed away, my cousin reached out and said, and actually it was my father's cousin. And he reached out to me and said, did your dad have the family disease? And I said, well, I don't know. What was the family disease? And the family disease was SCA3, which is spinocerebellar ataxia, which, and it was type 3, which in the ataxia family, that's one of the more common types. So anyways, I looked it up because I was a nurse for 20 plus years. I had no idea what that was. I looked it up. It fit my dad to a T. It was everything my dad had been experiencing for all those years, and found out that his cousins had the same thing. And so he had not kept in touch with them, and he did not know. And so long story short, in 2019, I got the test done, the genetic testing, and the nurse practitioner called me. And she said, well, the good news is you're barely positive. Excuse me? Is that like being barely pregnant? I mean, barely is a word she should have probably used, but either way, it was fine. And I was not upset when I found out I was positive. I had already grieved the loss of what was to come when I had this disease. I had already figured out there was many things I could do that my dad and my gramps weren't able to do. So I was not sad. I was relieved to get a diagnosis. So move forward 2 years. Well, really the end of 2019, I was having trouble at work. I could not keep up with conversations when there were several people involved in the conversation. I was having trouble with word finding, trying to explain diagnoses to patients and their families. And then the ultimate, I fell in a patient's room. and the patient was trying to help me. And I decided that was it. I didn't need to be a nurse anymore. And so that was my identity. For 20 plus years, I had taken care of people. That's what I did. And I loved it. I was one of those people who loved their job. And I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't do it. And so I was so distraught. I would cry in my office at work. I would cry on my way home. And I would cry when I missed a meeting. And it was just overwhelming. And so I had to reach out to a counselor, and I found that person through the NAF. They have a lot of wonderful resources on their website. I found support groups, and I found a counselor, and that got me through going on disability. And that was the hardest thing I've done so far, is to go on disability. And I'm sure grief will find me again. It's looming, I know it is, but I can be happy that I'm participating in research. I'm helping others. I'm helping people I don't know, but I told my dad I would find out what this was, and I did. And I can be proud of that. And I'm happy for the life I'm living, and I'm working hard to do everything I can to keep this disease at bay. And I know, as well as you all know, that grief will creep up on me again. When I have to change from my walker to a wheelchair, or I, have to make changes like that, when my speech and swallowing are so bad that you can't really understand me anymore, that will be new grief for me. But in the meantime, I'm looking for the positive. And I know Cara said this is one way of coping, by keeping busy, and I probably overdo that a little sometimes. So I will pass it over to Cheryl, who has a good relationship with Huntington's disease, or a bad relationship, however you want to introduce it, Cheryl. But I'll pass it over to Cheryl and let her tell you her story a little bit.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you, everyone. It's an honor and privilege to be part of this panel. I, too, am a retired registered nurse, and I live in Nashua, New Hampshire, southern New Hampshire, right on the Mass border. My journey with Huntington's disease began in 1989, when my first husband, John, was diagnosed with HD. We had been given confusing information when I had first met John, so we didn't know for sure that HD was really in his family. So when the diagnosis was made, it really did come as a shock to both of us. John was 37, I was 33, and we had our two daughters. Caitlin was 8 at the time, and Megan was 2. For that first month, I think John and I both cried, and I had never really seen John cry. And every time I looked at my daughters, because I knew this meant that they had a 50-50 chance of inheriting the genetic mutation that causes HD. And I thought, they're just so young. How am I going to go so many years? Typically, one doesn't become symptomatic with HD until around, between ages 30 to 50, except in the cases of juvenile, that could be the age of 2 on. But after that first month, we decided, and there was plenty of grief there, thinking, oh my God, our whole life has just changed. Our daughters' lives, have changed. And we decided, okay, we could just lay down and die and let this disease take us over, or we could take the high road, find everything out about Huntington's disease that we could, and this was long before the internet, and do everything in our power to learn and to educate and to advocate for others. And happy to say we took the high road, or I wouldn't be here today speaking to you. But and what initially helped us greatly was contacting the Huntington's Disease Society, of America. Within a month of John's diagnosis, we had gone to an education day and a support group. Support groups in these past 36 years have been very important to me, not only as an attendee, but for the past 17 years, I've facilitated 2 support groups, one specifically for caregivers and one a general for anybody in any way affected with or by HD. And even though I'm facilitating, I still am a member because I still share my stories, and everyone in my groups, they empower me, make me feel better, so it's definitely a two-way street. Very early on, also John knew it was really important to do whatever he could to contribute in clinical trials, and that was a way also, to overcome the grief, or at least to lessen the grief. I don't think the grief ever goes away, because you always are thinking what could have been, what should have been, why is it like this? And there are some days that I feel like, yes, I want to have a pity party or just not get out of bed. But in the end, I know, the way that I can best cope with the grief is by helping others. And, I have also been very blessed by wonderful family members and wonderful friends. And they, over the years, have made sure, that I have been taken care of, in the sense that, yes, you need a night out, or go for a walk, or a day at the beach. My first husband, John, did pass away in 2008. He was 56. He had been in a nursing home for 8 years. Luckily, the nursing home was very close by, and we could visit him. And again, he had been very strong and a very good role model to both of our daughters. He was a police captain. He was a marathon runner. He ran and completed 12 Boston marathons, 9 of them after he had been diagnosed with HD. For him, running was certainly a way, to cope with the grief. And he always said to our daughters, I hope that you never get this, but if you do everything that you can for as long as you can. And they certainly have emulated their dad. Sadly, my younger daughter, Megan, at the age of 19 in 2007, was diagnosed with the juvenile form of Huntington's disease. And initially, and understandably so, she was extremely angry. I was angry. We were both depressed. I mean, the first 6 months to a year, again, luckily we had the coping skills. We both went to counseling. I had the same psychologist / counselor for like 30 years. He didn't know anything about HD, but as I learned, he learned, and he was a godsend. And my daughter had her own social worker therapist for at least almost 20 years. And again, the things that helped her was to be an educator and an advocator. She passed away at the age of 26 in 2014, but her legacy, I'm so proud to have been her mom, and in all these years, so many people still recognize Megan, or how they touched her lives, or the HD community. Even people in the community that didn't know her know of her, and that definitely can help with my sadness to know a good thing has come from this horrible thing. My older daughter, she had gotten tested before she got she got married, she and her husband, and after a year, they wanted to start a family. So my daughter, they did not want to pass on the HD gene. And so my daughter got tested. She was found to be gene positive. And I know during the 6 weeks of a couple of months while she was going through the counseling and the genetic testing, boy, did I bargain with God, okay, you take, John, Megan, please, Caitlin has to be negative. And obviously it did not work that way. And at that time, yeah, anger, fear, again, everything. Although my daughter probably handled it better than I did, because she said, Mom, I grew up with this 50-50 hanging over my head, and now to know, at least in a way, it's a relief to know which way. But because she was genetically tested when she and my son-in-law decided to start a family, through CVS testing, we learned that my granddaughter does not carry the genetic mutation. And so in November of 2008, my granddaughter Tegan, who is now 16 and a half, and she's my miracle baby, has been such joy. But we know, it ends with her, that she does not have HD, and the chain is broken in our family. And that does help with the grief, looking at her. One last thing I'll say is I'm Catholic, and I had always gone to church. It was funny. John was Catholic. 2 of his uncles were priests. But after he got diagnosed, I was really angry at God, and I stopped going for a long time. And he started going. Felt like we were never on the same page. But after several years, and it isn't that I stopped believing in God, I was just really angry. But I knew all that anger, it wasn't helpful, and I got my faith back in God, and I realized, well, even in this horrible situation, he had given my family and I so much and so many blessings, and just trying to look at everything from a different point of view has been helpful. So I would certainly say, faith. And if you're not religious, it doesn't have to be faith, whatever your, philosophical beliefs might be, but faith, family, and friends, I've been enormously blessed. And we have friends that on a yearly basis do fundraisers for HDSA, and they're teaching other people. So although I wish this had never happened to my family, I cannot imagine what the past 36 years of my life would have looked like. 36 years ago, this isn't what I envisioned, but I have had a great, I'm almost 69 in these past 36 years. Yes, there's certainly downs, but many ups, and the wonderful people like all of you that I've met, that has certainly helped the grief to lessen. So thank you for listening.
Thank you both so much for sharing and being so vulnerable. And I know we use the word brave, but you have no other choice but to be where you're at right now. And you guys have taken that journey in a different direction than a lot of people. Before we end and wrap up, I would love to just ask one question that sort of is a key thing that some people were asking. Any advice for somebody that is experiencing grief, no matter where they are in their journey, or on having a really tough day? What is something you would share with them?
I would certainly say, if there's somebody you can talk to, again, it doesn't necessarily have to be a therapist, but, a friend, coworker. I know for me, just be able to talk it out and say, well, this is what's, bothering me, that has been very helpful, like to try to share. And even though they're certainly, not in the same situation, but just like I said, being able to talk it out and get it out instead of just, keeping it all inside. That to me, that's the most simple and basic way. Yeah.
Mhm.
In my experience, it's faith, family, and friends. And several of those friends I found through the NAF. So reach out to your local organization and find a support group. And even if you don't have to like everyone in the group or, but if you find that one person that you can connect with and that you can vent to when you need to vent, that's a blessing. So
Yeah, definitely reaching out to other community members, whether in the ataxia community or HD community, I think is really valuable and important. So thank you both for sharing that wherever you are, right? Whether you're a caregiver, somebody living with the disease, a young person with the disease, finding other young people to connect with, finding other people that are in similar situations, to know that you're not alone in your journey. Thank you both so much. And I will echo what everybody's sharing. Thank you both for being so inspiring. And your resilience is really invaluable. So, and thank you, Cara, so much. You did a great job. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.